Hey there team, and welcome to this, the third of the 4 workshops that we've got on this week. Not so long ago, I asked on the Thursday Challenge, Transform Your Running Facebook group, for you guys to vote in a poll on a few topics that I cover in a bit more depth this week. I looked at the results, we picked our topics, and so far we've covered quite a lot of ground. The first workshop, we spoke about sitting and the negative effects that prolonged sitting will have on our bodies. So lots of time behind the desk, lots of time behind the wheel driving. To be honest, 21st century living full stop, we all sit down too much, and it really does affect the way our bodies end up being put together. We become a product of the environment we put in and what our body does the most. If we compare the amount of time we spend sitting during the week compared to the amount of time we spend running during the week, it's quite understandable that sometimes it actually gets to a point where the amount of time you spend sitting impedes the quality of movement you're able to create when you get up and try and run. So I went through a number of workouts, a number of exercises, and in fact put together a free download, a free PDF document containing a bunch of exercises that you can work on a regular basis to try and undo the effect of prolonged sitting. And then from there, on day 2, the second of these workshops, we actually started speaking in a bit more detail in a very similar, it's kind of a leading on conversation from the sitting conversation about how to retrain those glutes. Muscles which, again, when we spend too long sat down for a long period of time, again and again, day after day, we get into a position where we get quite tight through those hip flexors, quite weak through those glutes a lot of the time. And it's a message we hear coming back incredibly frequently from runners who've been to see the physio or sports massage therapist or whoever, who have been told that you need to work on your glute strength, you need to work on activating your glutes. Your glutes don't activate as you run. That's part of the reason why you've started to suffer from plantar fasciitis, shin splints, patellofemoral pain, ITB syndrome, piriformis syndrome, low back pain. Lots of different yet very common running injuries that we see all the time, that a lot of the time some sort of gluteal dysfunction is part of the big picture when it comes to looking at the factors we have to correct in rehabbing the injury itself. So I went through a number of exercises and put together a little workout, again the PDF document that you could download underneath the video itself. There's a button you click, and also spoke about the kind of missing piece of the puzzle a lot of the time. A lot of the time the missing piece of the puzzle when it comes to getting runners to actually switch their glutes on as they run is to actually think about a little bit of technique, think about how they're running, okay? Because how you run will naturally affect which muscles you recruit to be able to run. And a lot of the time we get runners who, they say they've diligently been doing all the right exercises, they've been doing their glute rehab exercises, yet when they run they get the same old outcome that sent them to the physio in the first place. Actually getting them to think about a simple cue as they run to help them switch their glutes on. And again, spoiler, it's not clench your butt, it's not tuck your tailbone underneath you. If you haven't seen the video, go back and check that out. Pause this now, go back and check out video 1, video 2 in this series. The link's up here somewhere. And yeah, simply changing how you're running can really affect your ability to actually switch those all-important butt muscles on, which can be a massive game changer for so many runners, particularly those who've been plagued by injury or those who feel like they haven't got the power to give as they're running. So yeah, absolutely check that out. Absolutely have a look if you haven't so far, because today I want to move on and I want to talk about core training. Core stability, core strength, core training, core muscles. But what does it mean? Okay, so I want to start thinking about, from a running perspective, what's actually important and what's kind of just fluff when it comes to core training. Okay, so let's just take a step back for a moment and let's think about those core muscles themselves. Okay, so we've got your more superficial muscles, so kind of rectus abs. Think of them as your six-pack muscles. Okay, straight down the front of the abdomen here. You've also got your obliques, internal obliques, external obliques, which again are just, if we think about those six-pack abs, they're more just round to the side, more to the outside of the tummy region. Okay, obviously we think about those deeper abdominal muscles, so muscles like transverse abdominis, which if you think about a weightlifter's belt, it's a very crude way of sort of thinking about it and explaining it, but it kind of visualizes the whole situation quite nicely. It wraps around the lower abdomen, okay, and creates this stability around the lower trunk. Okay, they a lot of the time are a number of the muscles that come to mind first, but of course we've also got deeper muscles near the spine, so muscles like multifidus. Okay, we've got muscles which are less commonly spoken about in terms of being core muscles, but I think are just as important. Okay, and actually when we start expanding out the kind of the envelope of what we can consider core based on one simple premise, you suddenly realize that whilst I've just listed a number of the commonly cited core muscles, abdominal muscles, we can also start to think about a hell of a lot of the muscles in our body as being muscles which could be considered core. So let's just go through this one simple premise, the idea that any muscle which has an effect on pelvic position dynamically as we move, and the pelvis obviously is very much at the bottom of our spinal column. So if we move the pelvis, all of a sudden we're going to move the lumbar spine. So we could say any muscle that has an effect on the pelvis and therefore the lumbar spine as we move could be considered a core muscle. So we need to lump into that, and straight away our glutes, we need to think about our adductors, we need to think about our hip flexors, we need to think about the muscles of our low back. Okay, all of these muscles can be considered core, yet when we start talking about core, straight away people start thinking abs. And I want to move away from that a little bit. Okay, so why do I want to move away from that? Well, to be honest, when it comes to the conversations I have with runners all the time about the work they do outside of their running, they will tell me they do loads of core work. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll just say, "Oh, I'm a bit sheepish." They are sheepishly telling me that I just run. And actually, I know it's probably one of the reasons why I'm suffering with ITB syndrome. But that's thankfully getting less and less the conversation I'm having. What's more so the problem now, I find, with some of the conversations I have, is that it's the core, the preconception that yes, you're doing your core work, but when I dig a little bit deeper, what does that core work constitute? It's the conversation of being, I'm doing lots of crunches, I'm doing lots of sit-ups, and those sorts of exercises. And it's those sorts of exercises that really we need to move past. Because when it comes to particularly a crunch or a sit-up, so lying on your back and from there crunching up into flexion for the trunk flexion, that movement, when we're lying on our back, we're actually resisting gravity and we're having to work quite hard through rectus abs. But when we are upright, when we are walking, when we're running, all of a sudden everything changes. We don't have to fight for this movement in the same way as we do when we're lying on our back. In fact, when we're in this movement and we're not lying on our back, this movement comes for free. Okay, because gravity's pulling us forwards. So what we actually have to do is work a lot harder through muscles at the back, okay, thinking about our posterior chain. And by posterior chain, we can go ground upwards, really. We can think about our calves, our hamstrings, our glutes, the muscles of the low back, muscles of the mid back, and up. They're the muscles that have to work to actually hold us upright. And when we start to fatigue, so latter stages of a long run, that's why we end up finding ourselves, if we look at, we might not notice it intrinsically, but if you look at another runner, they go from nice and upright when they're fresh to feeling a bit kind of more crumbling forwards and somewhat more in this flex position as they're tired, because all of a sudden we're getting to that point where strength endurance of that posterior chain is being challenged to a point they can't maintain this nice upright posture any longer. Okay, so we need to think about the way in which, yes, we need to start strengthening those all-important postural muscles at the back, but also the way in which we need to think about the actual role of the muscles we started talking about to begin with. These abdominals, thinking about rectus abs, thinking about those obliques, the muscles that you would be training if you were doing crunches, but that work completely the other way around when we're in weight bearing. So if we're in weight bearing, okay, so standing upright, and let's say if I'm running and I'm going to come into hip flexion, so I'm stepping forwards on my left hand side, stepping forwards with my left leg. As I'm stepping forwards with my left leg, my right arm's coming forwards as well. Okay, and in this position, what's happening is my pelvis, as this leg's coming forwards, my pelvis is rotating round to the right, and as my pelvis is rotating round to the right, I'm actually also rotating my torso round to the left. So I'm getting this rotation and counter-rotation going on. And with this rotation and counter-rotation going on, I'm going to be lengthening through, on a kind of an oblique diagonal path, through the front of my torso. I'm going to be sending this shoulder this way and pelvis on this side this way. Now, you can probably begin to see with some of the lines on my top here. That's the direction I'm lengthening as I extend and rotate. It's the extension and rotation that needs to be controlled by rectus abs and those obliques. Now, if we've only trained them by doing lots of sit-ups, then they're not going to be used to doing that. They're not going to be ready to do that. So one of the first exercises I've actually put in our PDF document for today is a medicine ball oblique wood chop, working on that same diagonal path, both that way and that way, with right leg forward and left leg forward. Again, check the video out because there's more of a description, more of an explanation of that as well. But we start to actually train these abdominals in the upright, weight-bearing, running-like posture that we need to be in. Of course, you can do your sit-ups and those various exercises that you might want to do to try and work on the more kind of aesthetic side when it comes to your abdominals. Fine, that's up to you, but let's not forget that six-packs are generally made in the kitchen, but that's another whole conversation, not for today. But it's really important to think about trying to be as functional as you can, trying to be as, trying to give your body context as much as you can in the exercises you're doing. Again, another thing about sit-ups and crunches, so when you're lying on your back and going through exercises where your pelvis is, due to the fact you're sitting on your bum, your pelvis is fixed, that in itself completely changes the whole dynamic of the exercise compared to being upright, weight-bearing, and having to control the position of your pelvis. So basically, it doesn't just mean weight-bearing. Plank exercises are great for this as well, controlling the way in which force is transferred through this whole lumbopelvic hip region, this whole sort of crossroads in the body. When you're doing a crunch or a sit-up and you're sitting on your bum, that part's pretty much anchored on the floor. Your weight's bearing down on that, and it's in that position fairly stable, and you're actually moving around that as being the pivot point. When you're upright, or even in a plank position, all of a sudden your pelvis is in 3D space, and you're having to actually work to control what's happening around your hips and pelvis actively. Okay, and it's that control that we need to also develop as we're running. So there's an exercise which is part of the first day challenge, which is a little bit more complex. Again, it's a single leg exercise, but where we work starting out with the knee up in front of us, hands over the knee, working back into hip extension, trying to keep control of the pelvis, trying to dynamically keep control of that pelvis and dissociate hip extension from pelvic anterior rotation, trying to keep that pelvic control, so we're not just extending the hip and flopping forward through the pelvis, extending the lumbar spine. We're keeping control around this midsection while we move the legs, and we progress that to then moving the arms overhead. So that again is another one of the exercises that I want to put in our download for today and give you guys as an opportunity to test it out and give it a go. If you've not had an opportunity to do so yet, try some of this weight-bearing abdominal work, weight-bearing core work, rather than simply working through various different crunch variations, because as I say, the more we can be running like in our movements, the better. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about planks as well. Very quickly cover this. So when it comes to plank exercises, and we're all pretty much familiar, I'd imagine, with the typical front plank where you're on your forearms trying to maintain this plank-like posture, so your forearms and toes at the back end. Firstly, form trumps everything when it comes to plank exercises, but when it comes to plank exercises for runners, it's particularly, I believe, the side plank which holds the most benefit when it comes to just holding one single posture. So Compared to a front plank, side plank, reverse plank. Reverse plank's great actually as well. Again, really challenges that posterior chain. But I think if we're comparing front plank to side plank, every day of the week, I would get a runner doing a side plank over a front plank, because it really challenges this lateral aspect, really challenges our lateral stability, rather than simply relying on, yet again, this quite often overused anyway, anterior line of the body. Okay, anterior aspect of the body. So it starts to get us using our obliques a lot more, starts to get us really trying to use lateral hip muscles a lot more, both of which are muscles a lot of us could do with strengthening anyway. So if you're ever trying to make the choice between front plank or side plank, I'd say side plank. Now, also, and this is a question that comes up a hell of a lot, when it comes to progress with plank exercises, is it better to go longer to a point where you've gone from struggling with 30 seconds to you can do 45, do a minute. Once you can do a minute, do you go 90 seconds, do you go 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Different people will take benefit from working up to a certain point in terms of starting to actually hold that position and maintain that position. But by the time you get to, let's say 90 seconds, 2 minutes, holding a static posture, and you're able to do that impeccably with no wobble form-wise whatsoever, that's when I'd say the real benefit then comes from actually starting to add some dynamic movement to the plank. Okay, and there are all sorts of plank variations that you can work on or work through to actually start to change the loads that go through your body, add an asymmetrical load through the plank, rather than simply holding one position for a long time. In the download today, I'll put a video which goes through 10 different plank variations, which hits your body in all sorts of different ways, challenges your body in all sorts of different ways, rather than just maintaining a front plank or a side plank or a reverse plank for a longer and longer period of time. I'd rather you keep the time periods relatively short, so we could even go kind of 30 seconds as I do in the video, and just work through different variations, challenging yourself to make harder variations rather than hold easier exercises for longer, and feel the benefit come from that. Still, the big message I wanted to get across today was that when it comes to core work for runners, it is all about exercises which allow you to develop this control of this midsection, so the control of the pelvis, sort of lumbo-pelvic hip kind of region. And it's not just about those abdominals that we think of when we think about six-pack abs and obliques. Okay, it's all about lumping in there glutes and adductors and hip flexors and muscles of the lower back, and thinking about a bigger picture, and how if we combine exercises like our plank variations with exercises in weight bearing like our wood chops with medicine balls and those sorts of things, the sorts of exercises I'm putting in the download here, we can start to actually teach our body how to control itself in a running type scenario, rather than just doing endless crunches, strengthening ourselves in movement patterns that we just don't use in any other way other than arguably maybe when you're lying down in bed and want to sit up to read a book. You know, that's the only functional context in which case we'd actually use something like a normal crunch. So think beyond that, think about what we can do to mimic our running, and that will certainly help you come up with strategies to actually train your core more efficiently, more effectively. So I wanted also today to talk about what's happening tomorrow. So tomorrow is Friday, tomorrow's Black Friday. We've got another one of our workshops talking about strength training and how to incorporate strength training into our, whether it's a marathon program, half marathon program, 10K, 5K, but our running program. How do we make the run side of things and the strength side of things work effectively together? So I'm going to get into that in a bit of depth tomorrow. So again, keep an eye out for that. And when I present that tomorrow, I'm also going to let you know about our Black Friday deal, our Black Friday promotion that we're putting on for our Bulletproof Runners program. I've got a limited time period that we're going to be opening up registration for our Bulletproof Runners program from Black Friday through to Cyber Monday, so it's this weekend coming, giving a very, very good deal on that. So if you've been kind of umming and ahhing about whether the Bulletproof program might be a good option for you, definitely have a look at that. I'll be giving you more details tomorrow, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up really, so that you can expect that landing in your inbox and give it a bit of a look. Anyway, I'll speak to you guys tomorrow. Let me know in the details below, in the comments below, if you have found these useful, these workshops, if you've got any questions, but also tell me about your 2017 running goals. I'm really enjoying reading through and seeing what everyone's up to next year. I'll speak to you guys tomorrow. Take care. Bye now.